I taught a joker how it feels, by user competitive onion 886. A couple years ago a job with housing fell through, so I was stuck in a strange town and state with no money or home. I got a job waitressing and a side gig at night cleaning and did all the hours I could. I was tired, dirty, and hungry for 3 months until I found a person that needed a roommate. Things got better and I even got a little cat that kept me company. Luckily, the town was near a tourist area, and enough folks got lost on the way to tourist places that the diner I worked at was busy. But Sundays were the worst. The locals on Sunday didn't tip, and without tips, I went hungry. One Sunday, a local family left a $100 tip. But the tip turned out to be fake, with a sermon on the back, and it was stamped with a local church name and address. I was salty. For over a year that same family came in. I very gently tried to tell the man how disappointed I was when it wasn't a tip, but he said riches in God were better. He didn't ever tip at all for the whole time I was there. Then in September, a hurricane came through. The diner was flooded is closed. Since I didn't have a job anymore, I could go to church on Sunday if I wanted. I bought a lottery ticket and went to that church with the $100 sermon. The guy was there and turns out he was the pastor. There was only about 30 people in the church, and it had lost part of the roof in the storm. The people seemed nice, and I knew them mostly from the diner, though I didn't know their names. I never went to church much since I was a little kid, so it was different. They took an offering, and I put in my $2 lottery ticket. The next week I went again, with a lottery ticket. The $100 pastor teased me that he had never gotten a lottery ticket in the basket before, and I told him he was getting another one. Maybe God would make him lucky. He thought it was funny. Then the next week I took a fake lottery ticket in. My brother had given it to me, and told me it was fake because he didn't want to hurt my feelings. I had held onto it because it was from him. I put that in the basket. The 4th week was the last week I was there. I got a job in Cincinnati, and was going to drive up there that day. Folks at church knew because I had told them the week before, and they were saying goodbye. The $100 pastor came up to me and really quietly scolded me before I left, though. He told me it had been real hurtful to think he had won a lottery enough to fix the roof, and then it turned out to be a joke. He told me I should think about it as I drive to my new job. I told him that now he knew how I felt when he gave me that fake 100 when I was sleeping in my car and hungry. I left and was happy about it the whole drive north. It's the best thing I ever did. Drinking on my doorstep, get fired, by user monkey_juggler_662. Many years ago I worked at an office in the city center just a couple of blocks from my rented apartment, so I often ate lunch at home. It was so nice being able to relax at home in the middle of the workday. Until summer came around. You see, there was a bar right next to the, very narrow, door from the building's stairwell out to the street. So occasionally I'd come home to find someone sitting on the doorstep, beer in hand, especially on weekends, but I'd just politely say, "Sorry bud, I need to get in here," and they'd invariably stand up and let me pass, usually saying, "Oh sorry bud" back. Not a big problem in my life, in other words. But then one day I came home for lunch and there was a construction worker, around 50 years old, with high-vis vest and safety hat, sitting on the doorstep with a half-drunk beer in his hand. As always I said my usual "sorry bud" phrase, but instead of standing up this motherfucker looked up at me with contempt, looked down again and didn't move. So I had to lean over him, unlock the door and kind of half squeeze past/half step over him. When it was time to get back to work, the douche nozzle was still sat on the doorstep with a fresh beer in his hand and still refused to budge when I asked to pass. Same thing next day. Except this time he mumbled "prick" when I asked to get past. I was now fucking fuming. Day after day it was the same thing. This piece of shit ruined my otherwise perfect lunch routine to the point that I didn't want to go home for lunch anymore. Sometimes the shitbag was sat there when I came home at the end of my workday. But then I got an idea. I took a longer lunch than usual, ate a sandwich on a bench diagonally across from my apartment and watched him arrive at the bar, drink 3 beers on my doorstep, and when he got up to leave I followed him to his workplace just down the street. And this is where I got really lucky. He was working on a building that I knew pretty well. 'Cause I'm a structural engineer. And my colleagues were the engineers for that building project. Of course I didn't know this douchebag's name, but that didn't matter 'cause the fucking idiot had a goatee beard and a mullet/ponytail haircut which was pretty distinctive to say the least. So I went to my colleagues' floor and asked them what they thought about the site manager for that project. They replied, "Yeah, he's a good guy, professional, meetings are always friendly." My eyes lit up. Well, Next time you're on site, can you tell him that it's come to your attention that one of his guys is drinking at least 2 beers every lunchtime at name of bar and returning to work drunk. Around 50 years old, brown hair, goatee and mullet. My colleague told me 3 days later that the site manager was fuming when he heard what they had to say. He knew immediately who the guy was and had zero tolerance for guys being under the influence on site as they're a danger to others. So he had followed him at lunchtime, saw him sitting at his usual spot on my doorstep with a beer, and as soon as the guy arrived back on site after lunch he was fired on the spot. He made sure to do it in front of his other guys so A. They would know not to be so stupid, and B. Word would get out that this guy was an irresponsible drunk. Good luck with finding work in this town, fuckwad. Nosy Karen finds out the hard way why we were wearing masks, by users top. My friend and I was working on a project truck for another friend who's disabled, and it's covered with at least 30 to 40 years of dirt and rush under it. We washed most of the dirt off from the body and underside, and we were in the process of media blasting it, so we were both wearing respirator masks. We were taking a short break in front of his house messing on our phones when a lady walked up and asked why we were wearing masks. She had a mild point about the masks because of cook houses being in the area before. I told her we were cleaning a car and to move on, but she was being persistent about exactly what we were doing, so my friend told me to just show her while he fired up the Cheetah compressed air cannon for seating tires. I put my goggles on and proceeded to walk around to the side yard, and he fired the Cheetah at the ground in our direction, which kicked up a big cloud of dust combined of rust brake dust and undercoating right at us. She wasn't too happy about it, but she got the message since she left the area. His neighbor thought we blew up the house but laughed when she heard the story and told us about who she was. She's some kind property investor who buys houses, cleans them up, and rents them out. Harass my 18-year-old sister? Prepare to lose your job, by user Indicat7. This happened over 6 years ago, so I'm a little fuzzy on all of the details, but it is one of my proudest moments. I am 8 years older than my sister, and although we didn't live in the same town anymore by the time she graduated high school, I was so excited for her to attend university because she applied for the same program as I did, and knowing her, she was gonna freaking kill it in a way I never could. I am shy, awkward, and overall non-confrontational. She is fierce, charming, and never backs down from a fight. Our brother in the middle is a perfect mix between these traits. When she told me she was traveling down south for a conference related to a potential major, I believe. I was really excited for her. This conference also had a career fair, and it was going to be the first one she'd attended. I gave her some advice about how to present herself. She had her resumes and some companies in mind, and I knew she was going to do great. Cue to the day after, and I get a call from her in distress. So she wasn't sure how a certain networking interaction went and wanted to ask me what I thought. There was a man from a certain company who took great interest in her resume, a freshman, not unheard of, but at this point she had very little experience, so he pulled her aside and wanted to talk to her further. He asked her which hotel she was staying at. She got nervous, and said he should take her to dinner that evening. At the same time, this man, who she said looked older than our dad, reached out and stroked a strand of her hair. At this point she started crying and I saw red. I asked her for this man's name and the company he worked for and told her to avoid that table/company at all costs. I told her she did nothing wrong and he was being extremely inappropriate. I told her to keep a buddy with her while she was still down there and it was all right. She told me she was scared about talking to other companies in the future. How does she know if they really want her as an employee or if someone is going to be creepy? Also, as this man had her resume, apparently he'd texted that he was in front of her hotel and she avoided responding because she was scared. Because of this, she was scared to hand out her resume. I didn't think it was possible for me to be more enraged than I already was. She was 18. First career fair. Already she was terrified of career fairs because of this sleazy old fart. Hell no. Not my freaking sister, the world will not take her shine. I told her that I would take care of it and hung up. I immediately told my boss that I'd need to take the first half of the day for a personal matter. First, I looked up this man's LinkedIn so I could put a face to the rage and disgust I felt. Then I contacted my own company's HR and asked what the procedure would be if an employee of ours engaged in behavior like this while on company time. She had wonderful advice, and urged me to contact this man's company's HR department as well. So I did. I left a detailed email with what had happened, their employee's name and the location of the conference and career fair where he'd been representing their company. I left my name and number as well in case they wanted to know any more details, and I recall getting a call from their HR department soon afterward telling me they were taking this seriously and were going to investigate. The woman sounded very sympathetic. She told me that this man was someone that had been with the company for a while and had actually retired, so now he was mainly focused on recruitment for the company, somewhat on a consultant level. I want to say by early afternoon, I received an email that this man had been let go from the company completely, and they thanked me for my report. The speed at which this all happened lends me to believe this was not the first time, either that or his behavior was such a liability, sending a creep to recruitment, that it was easy to just let him go. Let me tell you, that was the most fulfilling cackle I had ever cackled in all my days. I called my sister up and told her the news, and she was amazed. She thanked me, and we talked a little more about what to look out for when networking, that being pulled aside generally is a good thing, but it sucks that this person took advantage of that. I told her not to take this horrible experience as normal because it was not, and emphasized she did nothing wrong. The good news is, 6 years later she has her bachelor's and master's degree, and has a stacked lineup of intern/co-op experience, think mix of start UPS and big name industries, and is currently rocking her career at a meaningful startup in her field. I am still shy, awkward, and relatively non-confrontational. But if you come for my siblings, I go for blood. My landlord learns the importance of keeping your word, and I learn not to renovate a rental condo, by Yuzurino Watahavi. I became a renter for the first time in my mid-30s, pretty late in life. Before that, I'd been on the other side of things. I'm a landlord and developer, which I realize doesn't endear me to most readers, but in my partial defense, I've built everything that I own, and with my own hands for the first few years. I started doing painting, finishing carpentry/millwork/cabinet making to make money during university, and when I graduated I had saved up enough to get horribly into debt at an extremely high interest rate, which I had to build my way out of. The first place I lived in after the dorm was a dangerously neglected warehouse that I had just bought, and ended up reconstructing into a fourplex. I lived there for the next 10 years while subsequently getting into new greenfield rental developments. Just before COVID I ended up selling that first place I had built, and the buyer wanted me out so they could raise the rent to market. This was to be my first time getting evicted, but the pain was numbed by the sale price during that huge market run-up. I also thought it might be tricky to navigate being a tenant in a building that I had built and owned for years. I decided to treat myself by renting a condo downtown, a huge step up from my previous one-bedroom that was chosen for its ROI rather than owner-occupancy appeal. I spent around 3 months looking at dozens of places and built up a good sense of the rental market as my pride insisted I get the best deal possible. I quickly learned that the market that had been so favorable to me the landlord was extremely difficult for me the tenant. I got incredibly lucky when I took a chance and viewed a condo on Craigslist that had no photos in the listing, never a good sign. It turned out the lack of photos was not an attempt to cover up, but simply the inability of the owner to work a digital camera. He did not have a smartphone. It was perfect, 2005 ISH building, floor-to-ceiling glass, high floor with 270-degree views A/C, open layout, well priced. The only problem? Very worn out, shabby 2005 ISH kitchen and bathroom, and the reddest looking cherry wood flooring you could imagine. Horrible cheap honey-colored fake wood veneer cabinets, gloss black appliances. Brushed aluminum finish everywhere, lots of frosted glass on the light fixtures. A simpler time. The landlord seemed like he would be pretty hands-off, and my application pitch was that if he was okay with it, I would take care of maintenance myself and just transfer him rent every month and not bother him. He loved the sound of that. He said he had bought a house in the suburbs and wanted to keep this condo for rental income for about 10 years until he retired. There are pretty strong tenant rights where I live, so long as he didn't sell there were no-fault eviction options. We signed the tenancy agreement, paid the deposit and moved in. The last time I saw him was during the move-in inspection, after which he exclaimed, "If you treat this place well, I promise you can stay here as long as you want." Big, firm, job interview winning boomer handshake, and he was gone. We loved the new place, a complete change from the up-and-coming part of town we had just left, 400 feet above the street. The absolutely horrible kitchen, bathrooms, and floors haunted me, but I had a plan and it was only a matter of time. One of my carpentry/millwork subs did a lot of retail tenant improvement as well as model homes and apartments for much bigger developers. When you are building a 30-story high-rise, you typically spend a few $100,000 to several million mocking up a unit in a retail showroom somewhere off-site to help you collect deposits. After the building sells out, That stuff gets either junked or sold on Craigslist. When I was doing single-digit unit buildings, I had bought a number of new old stock appliances, cabinets, flooring etc. out of a marketing manager's garage for cash. A few months later and it's the summer of 2020 and COVID is in full swing, and my carpenter emails me, one of his clients is cancelling their project, and since they are ghosting him on his draw, he is taking down their display unit. The drawings show an almost exact match to my unit in terms of dimensions. The spec sheet is jaw-dropping, almost 20 of Snydero cabinets, gloss white with champagne bronze hardware, Sub-Zero/Wolf appliance package, white marble counters and backsplash, Calista faucets. Easily $100,000 plus retail not including install. Oh, and 1,200 square feet of herringbone light oak planks if I don't mind pulling them up myself. How much does he want? $10,000 cash. Well, my job site is shut down for the foreseeable future, the government is making 75% of my payroll and I don't have anything to do except stare at my awful kitchen all day. After about 3 hours with my measuring tape and pencil, I ask my carpenter if he is willing to join my bubble for $40/HR cash for a few weekends. He is. One last step, email my landlord and ask if he doesn't mind me doing a complete renovation on his condo. Crucially, I conclude the offer with I'll undertake to return it to move-in condition before I leave. Not surprisingly, he accepts. That's okay, do whatever you want, we love having you as a tenant. Time to go to work. I get the old kitchen out in about 2 days, hampered by my need to work quietly as I'm doing this without permits, not like they are doing inspections anyways, but still. A side effect of this slow pace, and my wife's current obsession with Marie Kondo, is that everything is removed intact, and carefully taped and labeled. Taking out the old kitchen does indeed spark joy. The old floating cherry wood floor comes up in a morning, also tagged and labeled and bundled in the order it was removed. The carpenter comes over, and he gets the new kitchen installed in less than 2 days while I lay down the floor. The floor actually ended up taking me a week, mainly because I had to make the end cuts at my storage unit across town, since I definitely couldn't run a miter saw with everyone at home during lockdown. After just under 2 weeks, I had effectively a brand new, ultra high-end condo for just under $12,000 out of pocket. At this point I'm sure everyone reading this is facepalming as they wonder why on earth I'm proud of renovating someone else's condo at my cost. It did make sense at the time, as I was under the impression I'd be there for a good 10 years, plus the fact I was paying about $500/month under market at move-in, and more like $1,500/month under market in the current condition. There are a variety of economic and market conditions and segments where it makes more financial sense to rent than it does to buy. For example, my monthly rent would not have even covered the interest portion of a mortgage, let alone condo fees, insurance, taxes, and the opportunity cost of the down payment. In other words, it was cheaper to rent the condo than it was to rent the money that I would need to buy the condo. Also, as a builder, cash is a critical tool, and the more cash I can hold onto, the bigger I can build. With my 1-year lease, and the fact I had lots of free time, it didn't seem like such a reckless move. And who can say no to a $2,000 kitchen faucet? Filling a glass of water feels like working the bolt on a well-oiled Holland rifle. Worst case I could probably get most of it back by selling just the appliances if something unexpected happened. Which it did. I had undertaken all this after evaluating all the possibilities and weighing the risk of putting time and money into a place I don't own. I had failed to consider one important detail, the wife. By the spring of 2023 the upgrades had, in my opinion, paid for themselves after nearly 36 months of use. I hadn't seen the landlord since I moved in and he hadn't been in touch since approving my renovation except for the monthly confirmation he'd accepted my rent transfer, so naturally I began to get concerned when by the end of the first week of May, he hadn't deposited my rent. 2 emails went unanswered, until there was a knock on the door. I opened up and was hit with a wall of flowery perfume, which perfectly matched the wall of floral print and red heels standing in my doorway. The landlord had contracted COVID, in 2023, and sent his wife to collect the rent. I get out my phone to cancel the transfer and go into my office to look for my checkbook. I come back to find her, still in her heels, standing in the middle of the living room spinning like a Technicolor top. Oh wow, this looks fabulous. I heard you were doing some renos but I never thought it would look like this. Is that a Sub-Zero fridge? She opens the fridge. My fridge. I love the floors. And are these custom cabinets? She turns the kitchen faucet on and off probably 6 times. It took days to air out the smell of perfume after she left. Several hours later my wife came home, and given the lingering smell in the apartment, I'd already briefed her on who had stopped by. Fuck. I can tell by the smell she's seeing dollar signs. Sure enough, 3 weeks later I get a call from a realtor who wants to schedule the photographer to take listing photos as the landlords are selling. Of course the landlord, who has now recovered from his COVID, will not take my calls and won't respond to my emails. I'm upset that he doesn't have the courage to admit what he is doing. My wife is upset because she doesn't want to move, and I'm feeling embarrassed that I trusted this guy. I'm not really losing much since we've lived there for 3 years and paid tens of thousands less than market rent during that time, but it still stings. Even in the slow market the place sells in 3 weeks and yes, the new owners want to move in. They give me the required 3 months notice and pay the 1 month rent compensation. I note that the listing has advertised exquisitely renovated with top-of-the-line appliances, cabinets, and built-ins. No expense spared. My first instinct was to at least contact the realtor and suggest he check with the landlord about what was included with the apartment, and what was being represented, but the description in the listing infuriated my wife to such an extent that we agreed to let them do their own due diligence. I think you can all guess where this is going. This time it only took 3 days to pull the new kitchen out and put the old kitchen back in. Same with the floors, turns out you can lay 1,000 square feet of flooring in about 2 hours if it's all pre-cut and labeled. But, some of the TNG was a bit loose so I made sure to glue that bitch down to the concrete nice and tight to make sure it doesn't creak or pop. It's exceptionally cheap so it's going to splinter and separate if it ever needs to come back up. The old Home Depot Glacier Bay $49 kitchen faucet unfortunately started leaking when I put it back in, so I treated the new owners to a brand new replacement, now $60. The new one leaked as well, but not much, and only when it was on. I rewatched the move-in inspection video to refresh my memory and made sure everything was exactly as it was when I moved in, right down to a few small holes in the drywall. I had also forgotten that the old oven control board was fried, which meant it kept shutting off every 10 minutes. My wife and I debated leaving a wireless camera up on the wall to capture the new owner's delight at how faithfully we upheld our tenancy agreement, as unfortunately we moved out about a week before their planned move-in date, but there was still a reasonable chance of getting sued, so we opted not to, as intent is half the battle. I don't actually know what happened since I've ignored the dozens of phone calls from the landlord and the new owners, and just sent them a registered letter with my tenancy agreement, move-in inspection video on DVD and a copy of the email exchange with the landlord from 2020 where he allowed me to renovate the condo provided I put everything back the way it was when I moved in. I did get a text from the realtor calling me a petty, vindictive asshole and that I'm lucky I'm not getting sued, implying that my landlord probably is getting sued, and furthermore, one or all of them has looked into suing me and were advised against it. The concierge recently told me that nobody has moved into the condo yet, which presents another intoxicating possibility, because the new owners evicted us for their personal use. According to the tenancy law, if they fail to move in within 6 months they owe me a full year's rent as compensation for a fraudulent eviction. I still haven't bought a place. I ended up unfortunately having to pay a fair bit more in rent to move upstairs in the same building, with a different layout but thankfully much nicer finishings. I have an alert set for the building that tells me if a unit gets listed I'm ready to make an offer if there is a fixer-upper that comes up for sale. I even have a kitchen that might just fit.